Hello again, everyone, and thank you for coming. It's a pleasure to have Genevieve Pastor-Cohen before she retires end of June. Thank you so much, Genevieve, for joining us.
You're very
So
welcome.
please let us know about your experience, how Office of Emergency Services have evolved, and how we can continue moving forward, and any suggestion you may have for the community to improve things.
Sure. On the whole, over the past several years, um, we were able to develop some additional plans, emergency support functions to help our city personnel work through various situations should various types of disasters occur. It's called emergency support functions. So we developed that, and over the past several years, we've been implementing that whenever we do any training and exercises to help hone everyone's skills. Um, our EOC staff, we put them through incident command system training all the way up through EOC basic training that's online. And with that, we were able to practice at least the first exercise that we had an earthquake scenario. But in the last year, we've been doing mostly wildfire because we know that there's two areas that are in the high fire severity zones in the city of Richmond. So we're very keen to that, not to that situation. And so everybody, fire, police, public works, all of us have been working really hard to make sure that we're coordinated should there be a wildfire, and so that we can evacuate. So with that, we've had, especially with PSPS, public safety power shutoffs. So with that, um, the wildfire evacuation, that's been developing more and more between the cities, neighboring cities, along with the county. And the most important thing is communications, not only between the first responders, but with the community as well, and making sure that the that you have the right information. So I'm happy to hear that the county has um, brought on board Zone Haven, which is an online evacuation tool for the first responders. And as soon as it's up and running for Richmond, you will be able to um, log into zonehaven.com, and you can select myzone.com and indicate where you are, and then you could see on the map what if you are being evacuated or not, if there's evacuation warning or an evacuation order. But to build to that point, though, as you probably know, our friends in 94803, we've had last year we had several red flag warnings, and so you probably received the Nixle notification. So, and one of the things about the Nixle notification is that it's right there immediately as soon as we know that there's going to be increased danger for your area, and we always emphasize that in preparedness, everyone gets to know who their neighbor is, as well as especially if your neighbor takes a little bit more time to evacuate or whatnot, and to help them. And so in my red flag warning Nixle emergency notification messages, I indicate what to look at, what to do in the event of red flag warning to prevent fires, but also if you need more time to evacuate now, because it's better to evacuate now than to wait until when there is an actual fire and then having streets be full of people trying to evacuate. So we're going to continue to practice that, mainly because we're in wildfire season, and it's really high on our priority list to make sure that everyone's safe, that our first responders are safe, our community's safe. Also, so that's what we continue to work on. Also, too, the person who will be replacing me, and you'll be glad to know, is Jim Yoke. He has 23 years of experience in emergency management. He has been with the Red Cross for many years. He was with the County Office of Ed in San Diego several years. that when he moved up to the Bay Area, he was an emergency manager in Santa Clara County for 7 cities. So he's done the full gamut, and he's also multilingual. He doesn't just speak Spanish, but he speaks Vietnamese, Farsi, uh, Tagalog, you name it.
Wow.
He's incredible. And I'm really happy to hand the baton to him. I think you'll be very happy with him. And he's very passionate about emergency management and the community and making sure that's safe. And particularly too, and Michelle knows, I met him today in her the homeless task force meeting. He's passionate about the homeless population, being able to help them to be able to provide whatever information the population needs to be ready at all levels for our whole community. So that's a broad brush view of what we're doing, and also too with community preparedness, our CERT, we haven't been able to have in-person CERT. That's the Community Emergency Response Team training. And so because of COVID, we can't be in person. So the state, as well as the federal government, developed an online course. So we're looking at that right now in Contra Costa County as a way to deliver CERT, both in a hybrid sort of way. So I'm hoping that that will start to happen next fall. In addition, with community emergency preparedness, we just launched Listos California. Listos is a emergency preparedness for the neighbors, and Zia was there. Hi, Zia. and so it was great to see a lot of familiar faces there. I'm so glad that people are embracing that concept and sharing it with their neighbors. And that class will be offered as a virtual class all through the end of the year. And so, and Jim will likely be one of the trainers as well. So that's what we have in a nutshell. I'm willing to take questions at this point.
Thank you very much. I have some questions if other people don't have questions yet. Okay. I need to get contact information for Jim Yoke from you. I'll email you and ask for that
Oh, yes.
after this. But I would like to know why we were not successful in establishing a commission for emergency preparedness at the city level. It'd be great to have emergency preparedness commission where people have oversight and can have close communication. You know, I cannot do this forever. I cannot have a newsletter forever, and one person shouldn't be the only contact between the city and residents. We should have a commission. What did we do wrong, or what should we do? We want to be
Nothing, you have
successful.
not done anything wrong. It right now we just don't have enough bandwidth right now to do that at this time. And you can imagine with emergency management, this this particular office is a division of one person, and we tried our best to utilize our volunteers to get things done. And but it's basically bandwidth. And so right now, the best backup for something like that is having meetings like this with the community. So we speak directly with our community with regards to preparedness and planning. So I know that we have a lot of planning materials on the website for fire under the fire prevention area. We load that website so that you could educate oneself with what we have right now. And our people are very willing to meet with you and help you
Thank
and
you very
provide
much. But
education.
please tell us what we should do in the future to get that commission established within a year or two from now. What strategy do you suggest?
Well, at this, you had laid out a potential plan. And so what I would say is when our new fire chief comes on board, to meet with them, for you to meet with them, sit down with them or her, whether it be him or her, we don't know who it is yet. And so, and talk with them about it and the benefits of it. And then
Very
also, and in addition to that, offer a way that we can do it together. Offer a way in which some of your folks can be volunteer on that commission to help to get things done.
Sure.
because it's a partnership between the community and the city.
Thank you. So talking about fire chief, when will we have one? Do you know?
Well, right now I know they're in the interview process, and we're hoping that within the next 60 days or so that there will be somebody on board.
60 days? Oh,
Yes.
okay. Because I thought we were supposed to have someone by beginning of June or end of June, 60
Mhm.
days, like end of August?
I'm not sure, but
Okay. Okay. All right. And you've been in the Office of Emergency Services. I have two questions for you. Do you think if the services our community 94803 receives is proportional with respect to the population density and everything? And second, what are the priorities for us? There are things I feel like are missing, but because we've never had them, we don't even know we're missing them. Like
Mhm.
recently, I learned that other communities have a whole container of post-disaster material, including handheld communication devices, blankets, everything, a whole huge container. We had not even heard about them. So we don't know what we're missing in terms of preparation
Okay.
for emergency. I appreciate your advice.
Oh, actual, yes. In the other communities, that's North and East neighborhood, as well as Point Richmond, as well as Richmond Annex. They were able to obtain grants to get a container and put it in a place that's easily accessible to your CERT teams. The CERT team is really important because they have the basics. So, and they're able to, uh, once that you go through CERT, you understand what you need for the immediate needs after a disaster. And so, for instance, Point Richmond was able to get an ECIA grant from the city. And that grant is available every year. You can apply for up to $50,000. And
Wow.
yeah, and so
What
it's a
does
lot,
ECIA stand for?
economic um, ECIA.
I'll find
It
out. Don't worry. And that's the city of
right,
Richmond? That's our own
yeah,
city?
our own city because it's grant monies that are provided by Chevron.
Oh, nice. Okay, we should
And
apply for it.
yes, so it's and then also there are mini grants um that come up from time to time. For instance, well, Point Richmond got the grant, got this ECI grant. They got about $5,000, and you have to start early to start applying for it. So you may want to Google on our city website ECIA and um, get the information now so that you're ready to build a grant because there are a lot of requirements with regards to that. So because and then there are times when people get together and they just all chip in and get the container, and then from there they start building as a neighborhood for the supplies that they will need, and you learn about what kind of supplies you'll need by going through the CERT training because you'll see what you need to organize your community to respond. But that's for emergency response. But before that, it's so important to for as a resident in your neighborhood to understand what who your neighbors are because it's neighbors helping neighbors. Your neighbors are your first responders when something happens, and getting to know who your neighbor is, if they need help, if they're elderly and would need transportation. That's so important so that you could be there as a neighborhood family to help out. And and also too, there's other things that are tied in. For instance, you've gotten to know, I know Zia knows Karen and Jay Fenton, who provide uh, training on emergency communication radios. Karen just told me that, Sohaila, you bought a GMRS
I did.
radio.
I'm joining the
Yeah,
network.
yeah, because we can't depend on our cell phones just in case things come down. So with some of the ham radio operators and also GMRS, with GMRS you could communicate with a line of sight, and with ham radios you could communicate directly to our EOC ham radio operator if you need things, because communications is again really important. But there's a whole there's a lot to do, and I'm so glad that Karen Fenton has embraced Carriage Hills North, and they've been really open to her training and herself as a resource. And this is where we have volunteers who are anxious to help other communities. And so I'm really happy to have them on board to help others as well. They have a big heart, and I'm so pleased about them. So
Thank
I hope that gives you some places to start, because the money piece is important.
Yes, and you said max is 50,000, 50,000.
Right.
Okay, that's very nice. We'll look into it. Thank you very much. And do you think, with your experience, what do you think our community is missing? What should we, in addition to, citizen empowerment, or what else can we do? What should we ask the city or the fire department?
Well, as a community, build your CERT team, and there's and so there was a program called Map Your Neighborhood, so that you get to know what each neighbor has on your block to help out in the event of emergency. You may want to Google Map Your Neighborhood. It came from Washington, and I know that we brought it down to Alameda County and shared it with the communities there. And that was being shared by some of the community members in Contra Costa as well. So that way you within your neighborhood, you identify a refuge place just in case. And if people have fire extinguishers, they put it out on the curb when there's a disaster, so that if you need those, it's right there. You get to know who's a nurse, who's a psychologist, who's a doctor within your neighborhood, so that you can build that team. Because the CERT team is one thing, but the resources that you have right there, it's so important to know who's right there who could help immediately.
Thank you very much, Genevieve. I really appreciate it. Are there any questions for Genevieve? And yes, please go ahead, Doug.
Hi, Doug.
Hi, how are you?
Very good, thank you.
You have a wealth of information for Richmond residents. Is there any of this CERT grant or offer for unincorporated El Sobrante, for example, where I'm at, in this area?
It's unincorporated El Sobrante.
Well, there's a lot of unincorporated areas around us here, Terry Hills, and the list goes on.
Yeah, Carriage Hills, they just won a grant through CAER, CAER. That organization is the foundation is actually the chemical and petroleum industry is part of that, and they provide a grant every single year to the communities. And Carriage Hills just won one. Zia, did you want to mention what you all were able to get from that particular grant?
We received funding for some handheld communication devices, the lowest level of those, the FRS, which I think is Family Radio System, very short range, as well as I think some first aid supplies, bullhorns. There might have been something else that I'm forgetting.
Right. Yes. And
but
then
we had to write up a proposal and be very specific about what the money would be spent on.
And you could get up to $2,500. I think it was $2,500. And other communities were able to, within Richmond, and this is available to all communities in Contra Costa County. And so and I know that I pushed it out to all of my CERT community so that everyone would know about it. And it comes out in December. And what you could do is Google CAER, that's Contra Costa Alert and Emergency Response. and they have an annual grant that's posted on that site. And it's usually about December when they post it.
And by any chance, do you remember the deadline for ECIA?
ECIA, it just came out. I think I saw it in February, and I think I have to look.
Okay, I'll Google it. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
But I'm glad to know about it. We had no idea those grants were
Mhm.
available to us.
Right.
Okay.
And sometimes you could find other organizations that are willing to donate funding or even donate containers.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'll email you and I'll get some
Okay.
contacts from other neighborhoods that have done it. So
Yes.
maybe we can learn from their experience.
Absolutely. I could email you some of that information so that you could learn from them. That's Kristen Gates over at Point Richmond. And then also Sophia Ritchie in Richmond Annex. And then also, who else? Rebecca Newburn from North and East
Wonderful.
neighborhoods.
And I'm curious, how many people have access to that container?
Let's see, whoever's CERT trained.
Oh, okay. All right. So we need to have more CERT trained people.
Mhm.
Okay. Thank you very much. Steve.
Because it's yours, it's your neighborhoods.
Yeah,
you're
and
no-
I'm sure in case of a disaster, we're not going to discriminate between unincorporated and City of Richmond. Everyone will benefit from it. So that's
Absolutely.
why I encourage everybody from unincorporated and the city get together and apply for those grants. We get them and everyone can benefit from that. Anything else you would like to add for us, for our community?
Well, I have to say that I've really enjoyed working with all of you, and you allowed me to put on my thinking cap many, many, many times and to reach out to my resources to find out, okay, how can we address the community's question? And so it's been able to raise your interest higher within the city. So we appreciate your being interactive and letting us know what you need.
Thank you very much, Genevieve. If after retirement you ever miss my nagging or complaints or anything, I'm here. Give me a call. You can hear all about it.
Yeah, and we do need to hear from you because we need to hear what the community needs. Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. And please put me in touch with your successor so we can keep the communication.
I'll put his email in the chat. How's that?
Wonderful. Okay. Thank you so much. And we wish you the best of retirement. Any special plans, trip to Hawaii or something? Or
well, I was planning on exploring the Bay Area and also strengthening my ties to my friends and my family, and then also doing day trips and spending time with my husband and getting involved more into orchestral performance. So because I'm a flute player as well.
You've been a jewel to the community. You've been very resourceful, very helpful, very patient, very nice to us. We really appreciate that on behalf of the community. Thank you very much, Genevieve.
You're very welcome.
Happy retirement to you.
Thank you
so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoy your retirement.
Yes, you deserve it.
Thanks again for joining us.
Happy
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
We're gonna miss Genevieve. I'll try to stay in touch with her. Anyway, thank you very much, Michelle, for joining us. So please
Thank you.
Update you. You're very nice too, and thank you for your positive energy and always being available to us. Thank you so much. So, tell us about the police department and what's going on there. And
yeah. Well, I'm happy to be here. I'm always happy to be here. I think you asked me at the beginning of the meeting, was I a Richmond resident? Yes, I was born and raised here, lived here most of my life. There was a period of time I lived in Oakland, but I'm back in Richmond and I'm in 94803. So I'm very familiar with a lot of the issues that come up with this group because I live in the neighborhood. So happy to be here. But tonight I'm here to talk about the police department and, just a little bit about what's been going on with this whole conversation around reimagining public safety and what it means for the police department. So a lot of you may have been following the city council meetings, the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force, or next door, or some of the things that are going on. Last year, the city council authorized the creation of a Reimagining Public Safety Community Task Force. And the charge of that task force really was to determine what the preferred community policing model would be for the city of Richmond. It was to take a look at what we currently are doing, and really part of the task of that group was to make some recommendations to city council around policing and around the kind of services and investments people wanted to see in the community, and the kind of changes they wanted to see in the police department. That was a 21-member task force. Each council member got to appoint a specific number of members to serve on that task force that was established. I was assigned as one of the staffers to the task force just to help with, requests and information that might come to me during that time. So during that time, we really began meeting last summer and continued to meet still to this day. One of the things that the task force was looking at is how to determine what the budget allocation would be for the police department in terms of the recommendations that the task force would make to city council around policy decisions about funding certain programs. So I don't think it's any surprise is that, the argument has been, which is true, that many of the sources and resources for programmatic pieces in Richmond are underfunded. And I don't think this is true just of Richmond. I think you can just take a look around the country and you can see that. That's mental health, homeless services, services for youth that were identified, in addition to, other services that the community might need. So in terms of the budget for Richmond PD took a approximately $8 million cut in the last budget cycle, not this current budget cycle, but the prior year cycle, which resulted in us not fulfilling a variety of positions that, were vacant. And so if you think about budgeting, and some of you might be, finance folks, so you may think about it this way already. The general fund, kind of is the mother of all the funds. So if you don't expend your dollars within your department, or say you have positions that you haven't yet filled, either because they may be in the process of being filled, but they're currently not filled, or they're just vacant due to, trying to recruit folks for that particular position. At the end of the year, it's very likely that the general fund will come back and take those positions to be able to balance the fund and basically say, you didn't expend all your dollars. So all that came from the general fund, and all that comes from the general fund thus returns to the general fund. So the prior year, we did lose about $8 million in funds for the police department in order to balance the general fund, and all departments had to give back, but that was our give back. So the council and the task force, had an opportunity to kind of have a 9-month period to take a look at different community policing models, what would be the preferred policing model. I shouldn't say community policing. And they determined there were be 4 key areas that they were going to focus on looking at. And that was what I just mentioned, plus the whole issue of accountability, which deals with, how the police interact with the public. Some of those had a budget consequence. And so the task force initially recommended about $10.3 million to appropriate to support some of the service needs for the programs that were being recommended. That's where I think, the process became challenging, because $10.3 million is more than the $8-something million that the police department ended up giving back the year prior. And would be, quite frankly, pretty a critical blow to our operation. There's no way that you can get to 10.3 without reducing positions. I mean, there were suggestions, well, maybe you could reduce contracts. Some contracts are required. You know, you have to have animal service and animal control. You know, there are some contracts that are just, you know, mandated by law that we'd have to have. So, and really the suggestion was that these reductions should come from, you know, the sworn side rather than the civilian side, because we're low on dispatchers and critically low on dispatchers. So, you know, that would have resulted in a net loss of somewhere in the neighborhood of around 35 officer positions. And it was clear that some of those would be filled and that would result in layoffs. So with that said, you know, many of you probably know the outcome of that. There was a lot of community concern about that really kind of went too far. There was a definite support for wanting to provide these services, but there was a concern from many of the neighborhoods that went too far into the operations. Yes, you did hear that right, Virginia. And so there ended up being this dialogue that went to city council, because city council ultimately had to make this decision because it's a budgetary decision, right? So the task force makes a recommendation, but the council has to be able to adopt that recommendation into the budget to be able to fund it. And so when it came up for discussion, the council asked that staff go back and work with the task force to take a look at the recommendations, given that the chief said that would severely impact you know, our operations and our ability to be able to provide the level of services we need, because we already took the reduction, and come back with some alternate funding sources. And so staff did that. And in the meantime, the task force also, you know, heard from a lot of the community members who were quite frankly very upset by, you know, these proposed reductions. And they went back and they made some modifications to their own recommendations. So city staff, which is the city manager and other staff, came out with a total of options A through F. And those options range from taking 10.28 that would be derived exclusively from the police department permanently, to not actually taking anything from the police department and taking a look at other funding sources like ARPA that's coming from the federal and the state government to help fund cities in the aftermath of COVID-19, and looking at other resources like in lieu housing fees to be able to cover some of the programmatic things that were being suggested by the task force. Ultimately, the council chose option E, which was a $6.38 million funding of the recommendations of the task force for the programs, but it also resulted in a $3 million permanent reduction for the police department. And so what that basically means is that we have 12 positions basically that were vacant that we would permanently lose. So it basically takes us to 145 sworn. That's a lot different than kind of the Magnus years where we were at 192, or even a couple years ago when we were in the 180s. So we would be at 145 sworn. We would still be able to hire up until that point, but not beyond that point unless there was some other decision that was made by city council. So what does that kind of mean for us kind of going forward? Well, it means that now Chief French and, you know, command staff have to figure out how to determine how we operate with less services. So, you know, one of the suggestions is that if we fund these other services, there might be reduced calls for police service, which may indeed happen, but we just don't know that, right? We don't know that these are going to result in direct correlations of immediate results of, you know, less calls for service. So we have to be able to plan accordingly for being able to make sure that all the 9 beats at least have one police officer that are serving that area. And so what we're going to be doing now internally in the department is kind of figuring out, you know, where we go from here. And what that probably means is that next year, we're going to be collapsing certain units so that we can make sure that patrol is adequately staffed, because it's very important for a lot of different reasons for officer safety, actually to make sure that you have enough officers to be able to respond to the calls for service that we do get, that, you know, patrol is adequately staffed. but that's a balancing act, right? Because, the police department isn't just a patrol officer, it's investigations. I've been working with homicide this week on some of the things that, trying to get resources to some of those families that have been, suffering from some of the homicides this week. There are traffic units. There are special units that work with domestic violence and sexual assault and human trafficking. So we have to make some decisions about how those units function and how many staff do we want to allocate to some of the investigative units, so that we can make sure that patrol remains functional and that we have enough officers to be able to staff the 9 police beats adequately across every shift. So that's where we are today. What that means for the public is that, there may be some changes in some services. You probably have seen that over the last year, not just because of COVID-19, but because of reduction of staff. So there's things that we don't respond to now. So for example, civil standbys that are after hours, we're not responding to that. Animal control calls that don't have anything to do with the police department. We are encouraging more online reports for property theft and crime because it just, it takes a lot of staff to go out to a cold call, not something in progress, but a cold call, and be able to, have somebody take those reports. So that's really where we are right now, is trying to figure out what that looks like, what contracts we're able to, keep, or what contracts we need to reduce. So there will be a reduction. I mean, the good news is there's no layoffs that are planned. I think that was the middle ground out of all of this that everybody came to, is that they did not want to see layoffs. But there still are impacts and consequences to the police department of that over time. And I see that there are some questions in the chat. Let me know, Sohelia, if you wanted me to take those. I'm happy to pull those up.
Yes, please go ahead. That's very kind of you. Yes, please.
Okay, so 35 officer positions. Yes, Virginia, you did hear that right. And then I see from Maryland, did the task force actually produce a written report? I cannot find it on the Richmond website. Yes, they actually did quite a bit of research. There is a Reimagining Public Safety Community Task Force page that has a lot of their resource. They were looking at models in Eugene, Oregon of cahoots and other programming where, for example, instead of calling the police department, you might call a variety of other different services that you would utilize for non-police response calls. So they have a lot of that on their page, and I can send that to Sohelia so that gets to you. We do a lot of work with other organizations. For example, my unit, in addition to crime prevention, a couple years ago, started focusing on homelessness. So I have the core homeless outreach team, which are civilians that are contracted by the county for Richmond and San Pablo. And we utilize them, to help provide case management and navigation for the homeless that is not necessarily a police response. So we have a mental health engagement team. It's just one officer and their clinician. So, the police department has been doing these kinds of things over the years, but the task force wants to see those models either expanded, or there's other models that they want to take a look at. So there are things that you can take a look at. Civil standbys, it's kind of like, say, someone was moving out of a home and there was concern that there might be some kind of an incident there. Someone's going to pick up their property, and there is some concern that, that it might be a tense situation. You could call the police department in for a civil standby for, a kind of a custody exchange sometimes. So we're going to be limiting what we do on those kinds of issues. And someone said, is there any change in wellness checks for the elderly and disabled? I'll have to get back to you on that. We were looking at, what we would call welfare checks. Is that something that we still need to do? I don't know if that's been determined or not. I know that was something that was being looked at by the chief and senior command staff. So that's something I'll have to get back to you about. Obviously, if you think someone is in danger, or if someone might have a medical emergency, you could still call 911, but it just may be that certain welfare calls the police may no longer respond to. And then I was reading their page. There's no encompassing report with their conclusions. They do have a report. I know that they came out with, and several reports from the different committees, because there's a budgetary subcommittee, there's an accountability subcommittee, there's a committee that focuses on health and wellness. So you may have to kind of sort through there to look at the different reports that came out. But I can connect you with the task force staff. And if you have any questions, it's run through Community Service Division. I'd be happy to connect you to them so that they can direct you to that, because I don't staff it directly. I'm just staff that participates in the task force. And I see somebody has their hand up.
Before they go on, let me ask my question. Is the task force work is still going on? We did not have representation in the city council. Nobody from our community, 94803, was in the task force. So we have a lot to say. Their work is still being continued? If yes, who's in charge? We would like to talk to them. So maybe we have just a bit of after fact input.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just met with them last night. They're still meeting. They have decided to have their meetings go to once a month, and then there's going to be an implementation team to work on the implementation part. So I can connect you with their coordinator. Actually just took a job doing something else, and so Joanne has resigned from the city. But there is a interim community services director, LaShonda White, who is our assistant city manager, who you can connect with. Also Jim Nantel. I think Jim would be a great person to connect with, who has been providing support and resources and served as interim, CSD. So he was the interim Salvaca. And so I can connect you to both of them if you want more information or about the process. And they're public meetings, so you're totally welcome to come and express your opinions or come and ask questions. That's what they're there for.
Yeah, we would like to invite them to a Zoom so they see our community, actually, because we've never been heard before. Virginia, you have a question. Go ahead, please.
It was kind of, I was getting the sense that the task force is pretty much a Richmond thing, not a generic task force that this community over here is doing this, that, and the other, and therefore we're going to do this, that, and the other, whether or not it's appropriate to our city or our community. Is that right, or is that wrong?
So the task force is basically, it's not a commission, it's a citywide task force. And, the members on the task force were appointed by the city council, but the recommendations have an effect on all of Richmond. They do have public meetings. They did have some community roundtables about some of the subcommittee work that was being done. So it is a Richmond thing. And I would say, if you would like to participate, definitely show up, get involved, let them know what your perspective is, listen to kind of what they've been doing. I think that's going to be important to the work going forward. But yeah, it's definitely a Richmond body. It's not just representing like neighborhood groups or anything like that. It represents policy making citywide.
Thank you. Marilyn?
I never got straight whether they ever considered that the police are mandated to do evacuations. Can you address whether that was ever a consideration in their minds? Did they ever, or did it actually come up? I didn't get to these meetings. I actually prefer written material. I'm kind of zoomed out. I think a lot of us are. But, it struck me as peculiar that they never considered the harm of not having sufficient resources for disaster. And Richmond has not only the usual earthquake, wildfire, and that sort of thing. We also have industrial accidents at an even greater frequency. So was that ever on their page? Did they even think about it?
If it was considered, it wasn't something that I remember, and I've been at most all of the meetings. It may have come up in the subgroups because I wasn't a part of all of the subgroups. So that's a good point. I don't know whether it was considered as folks made their recommendation.
It kind of sounds like they had a very limited groupings of experience. It's too bad. Anyhow, I'm going mute again.
Thank you. Michelle, I'm confused what the task force is doing currently.
So the task force now has made their recommendations. Obviously, council has voted with option E, which is the $3 million of, the reductions permanently from the police department budget, and then 6.38 total to fund the programs. So they're moving more towards, they can still make recommendations. They're a recommending body. But they're moving more towards implementing, the programs based on the funding, the $6.38 million in funding that are now allocated towards these programs. So that's what I think will be the scope of their work. It may change, but my understanding is like the next step is really kind of looking at how do we implement, these programs and work with staff to try to, for example, one of the charges is to set up a community-based mental health response so that there is community-based mental health response that is non-law enforcement. The other thing is implementing a homeless intervention strategy. What does that look like? I think that there's been a significant portion of funding suggested for, organizations like SOS Richmond, and looking at transitional villages and other approaches. So I think their work now will more center around implementation, but they can still make recommendations to city council at any time.
Is there a deadline for how long they're going to stay active?
So that's a good question. So the council voted to extend the task force. I don't know if it's beyond, if they have to come back and reauthorize it within a year, but I know at least for the next year that the task force will be extended. So there's a possibility this could be just an ongoing body within the city, but I would have to take a look at how long the extension was for.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, we would like to get their information, and I don't know if it's a flat structure or there is a leader or head of the task force we can invite to come and communicate with us. But yes.
Yeah. So I think probably the best thing for me to do is to connect you with Jim Nantel, and and usually what happens is there's a request that's made to the task force, and then whatever members are available would come and talk with you all, and then they could share with you their perspective. And admittedly, the task force, there isn't necessarily always agreement on everything, every item, that was there, but I'm trying to be as non-biased as I can. This is my summation as staff, they may have other things that they would want to share with you about the work that they do. I think one of the important things is that, as we kind of go through this whole conversation about, looking at the police department and reducing, funds, is that, Chief French has just asserted is that she wants to be able to have enough to be able to staff to be able to respond to the needs that come up. And so over this next year, obviously, as these programs get established, we'll see, what some of the needs are. But it's been a very challenging period of time, I think, and discussion. And it's important for all voices to be at the table so that everybody's really feeling informed. And as residents, everyone has a voice in the process.
Is there any statistics or data about how much of police presence or budget is spent at each beat?
I don't know that it's if they have it broken down by budget per beat, and that's something I can go back and I can ask for that information and see if there's a way for us to break it down that way. It usually is done by staffing, and so it's done by patrol versus investigations and not necessarily by beat. Theoretically, all beats should have at least one beat officer per shift. So that's not a lot. If right now in the city you have 9 per shift, that's 9 officers for the whole city. It's not a lot. There's overlap though, depending on when shifts come on, and then other units like specialty units can offer additional layers of support. So that's how those are broken up. But I can always go back and see if I can ask for that information.
Okay, we appreciate it, because if there is only patrol service we're using or limited police in our neighborhood because it's relatively safer, we don't want that to be reduced, that amount that we have. You see what I'm saying? Also, I know other parts of Richmond have shot spotters. We don't have it. It was on the next door that some neighbors thought they had heard gunshots. Should we have them? Are we going to have them? How do we request them in case neighbors want it?
Yeah, so ShotSpotter is a very helpful tool. Basically, it helps us with identify where gunshots are coming from. Gunshots all have this thing called an acoustical signature, which means it's a fancy way of saying is that, you are able to hear it and it sounds a certain way. And ShotSpotter is technology they developed in the military because you would want to know where gunshots are coming from. Sometimes when you hear a gunshot, you can't necessarily tell the direction where it's coming from. So ShotSpotter will actually triangulate within 10 feet, show you on a Google map where that gunshot came from, and then you can send officers out to respond. That's really helpful because if somebody is shot or injured, sometimes neighbors either don't call or don't know like where to direct people to, and you're able to get resources, emergency services to that person, if they're injured more quickly. And so it's definitely helped us with our crime, to be able to help reduce some of those, shootings that probably would end up being fatalities. So to get it, you need more resources, you need more money. It's like with anything else to expand it. So at this point in time, I don't think that there's any plans to expand ShotSpotter. That would really be something that we'd have to ask for, but we'd also have to have support from, the budgeting process and from city council, to be able to expand something like that.
Okay, thank you. Marilyn, please.
I've been wanting to ask this for a long time, Michelle, and you may or may not be able to answer. Does this also help in firecracker identification, or can it be set up like that? Because to be honest, firecrackers are going to kill a lot more people in our district than shotguns over time. And I understand a lot of people in Richmond don't think firecrackers matter, but we've already had firecrackers started fires out here.
Yeah, firecrackers are they're a tough one. And I know this group knows that they're a tough one, especially with fire prevention, and especially because it's so hard because the officer actually has to come and on view it or get some video to see the person who is lighting the firecracker for us to be able to make a case to the district attorney. So yeah, ShotSpotter can pull out the firecrackers. They can pull out some of that information, so it can be helpful. But one of the problems is that there's so many, the proliferation of it is that sometimes it overwhelms the system, when you get up to the 4th of July and even before. I know you guys know, I mean, I hear them all the time, and then, you hear boom, boom, boom. And it's not just like the sparklers, right? It's, it's grenades, basically that people are launching. So we can use that to help us identify where some of those firecrackers are coming from. And if we have the staffing, we can actually go and try to follow up in those neighborhoods. But we really need to see and on view someone to get a citation. And that's part of the problem. And it's so prevalent. You can go to the fairgrounds now and you can buy boatloads of these things. You can get them off the internet. People have it. So our officers have been focusing more on the sales and trying to get people who bring in large amounts to the city. But we obviously got to work regionally to do it because it's like, we're not going to do it alone by ourselves.
I can actually foresee that it would be terribly helpful to the arson investigations to know that there was a big cluster of firecrackers in a specific spot where a wildfire started and going through the whole community, or just 5 or 6 homes. I mean, no matter what, it's a brutal result. And I just think that even identifying hot spots has got to be helpful.
It is helpful. And, it's definitely helpful for us to be able to respond. The hard part for us is, being able to get enough information where we can respond. There's been less firecrackers this year so far than there were last year. But it's been huge. It's been a huge issue. And I think last 4th of July, there were like something like 300 to 500, individual events of fireworks. There's no way, even with extra patrol and detail, you're going to be able to get officers out to every single one of those. So, the technology is helpful. Cameras are helpful. All of those things are helpful, but it's going to have to be a bigger strategy. And it's hard because people say, well, it's just fireworks. And there's a certain percentage of people in the city who are just like, why are you as the police, bothering with this? Spend your time doing something else until there is a major fire and something happens. And then people realize that, it's a balancing act of that in fire zones and fire areas. So it's a very challenging issue.
Okay, thank you very much, Michelle. Are there any more questions for Michelle? I think we're past 7 o'clock. We want to be on time, so next time we invite you to join us again, please.
Thank you. Thank you all. I appreciate you, and thank
Of
you for
course.
having me.
We'll be in touch with you by email, and we'll invite you again. And thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle.
Have a nice evening.
You too.